The ballroom of the Grand Monarch Hotel glittered under the soft gold of its chandeliers. Crisp white tablecloths draped over round tables, each adorned with towering arrangements of white roses and golden lilies. A live jazz band played softly from the corner, their music weaving a sophisticated backdrop to the evening. It was the annual Apex Global Corporate Awards, the most anticipated event of the year for the company. Executives, partners, and shareholders had flown in from across the country, dressed in designer suits and flowing evening gowns. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, fine wine, and corporate ambition. Talia Adeyemi sat at table 6, her back straight, hands resting lightly on the tablecloth. She wore a floor-length emerald green gown, modest but undeniably elegant, with her natural 4C hair styled into a sleek bun that showed off her high cheekbones. She had been at Apex Global for 6 years, working her way up from a junior analyst to a senior strategist. Tonight was supposed to be her crowning moment. Her department head had hinted all month that she would receive the official promotion to Regional Operations Director, a role she had worked toward relentlessly, logging late nights, sacrificing weekends, delivering results that had pulled the company out of a slump in 2 major territories. When the host, a smooth-voiced master of ceremonies, began announcing the special awards, she felt her heart beat harder. She had rehearsed her smile, even her walk to the stage, imagining how proud her parents back in Ibadan would feel when they saw her photos on LinkedIn. Marcus Daniels, the Senior Vice President of Operations, tall, silver-haired, and perpetually smug, was already on stage, holding a stack of gold-embossed envelopes. He was the one handing out promotions and special recognitions tonight. Marcus had never been Talia's biggest supporter. He was the type who preferred people who flattered him, and Talia, though respectful, had never been the type to stroke egos. She brought results, not empty compliments. But still, she believed merit would speak for itself. She tried not to think about his occasional dismissive comments in meetings or how he sometimes took credit for her ideas in front of the board. And now, Marcus's voice boomed over the microphone, a special recognition for leadership potential and outstanding contributions in operational strategy. The spotlight swept over the audience, and Talia's tablemates turned toward her with knowing smiles. This promotion goes to... He opened the gold envelope with exaggerated slowness, looked up, and said, Talia Adeyemi. Her table erupted in applause. Talia smiled, rose to her feet, and smoothed her gown. Every step toward the stage was a mixture of pride and relief. She extended her hand toward Marcus as he held the crisp, white envelope containing her official promotion letter. And then, everything shifted. Marcus did not hand her the letter. Instead, with his other hand, he grabbed the top of the envelope, tore it open, pulled out the thick cream-colored paper, and, without warning, ripped it down the middle. The sound of paper tearing sliced through the applause, like a knife through silk. He didn't stop there. He ripped it again and again until the once pristine letter was nothing but jagged scraps between his fingers. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The jazz band faltered mid-song. Talia froze, her outstretched hand suspended awkwardly in the air. The spotlight was still on her, making the heat rise in her face. Her heart pounded so loudly it drowned out the murmurs around the room. Marcus held the microphone closer to his lips. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his tone dripping with condescension, "sometimes we think someone is ready for leadership. But leadership isn't just about numbers and results. It's about presence, about commanding a room, about the right personality for the job. And unfortunately, Talia here, well, she's just not quite there yet." He let the pieces of the letter flutter to the floor like discarded confetti. Better luck next year. The audience was stunned into silence. A few exchanged uncomfortable glances. Others stared at their wine glasses as if avoiding eye contact could erase what they'd just witnessed. Somewhere in the back, someone let out a low whistle, quickly stifled. Talia's fingers curled into her palm, nails digging into her skin to keep from trembling. She could feel every pair of eyes on her, some pitying, some curious, some barely hiding their smirks. She swallowed hard, forcing her expression into a mask of calm. "Thank you for your feedback, Marcus," she said evenly, her voice carrying just enough to be heard without the microphone. There was not a quiver in it. She bent down, gathered the torn pieces of her promotion letter from the stage floor, and tucked them into her clutch. Marcus arched an eyebrow as if amused by her composure. "Oh, she's keeping it," he said into the mic, eliciting a few nervous chuckles from the audience. "Of course," she replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. "It's a reminder." The MC, looking flustered, quickly moved on to the next award, trying to restore the evening's celebratory mood. Talia walked back to her table with slow, deliberate steps, her chin high. Her colleague shifted uncomfortably as she sat down, but she said nothing. She poured herself a glass of water, took a measured sip, and kept her eyes on the stage. She wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of watching her crumble. Across the room, Marcus laughed with another executive, clearly pleased with his theatrical display of power. Talia could see his profile lit by the stage lights, the smug curve of his lips, the way he leaned in to whisper something to his companion that made them both chuckle. He thought he had humiliated her beyond repair, that he had delivered a career-ending blow in front of the company's elite. But as she sat there, the initial sting began to transform into something else. Under the humiliation was a cold, hard clarity. She understood something in that moment. Marcus's move was not about her performance. It was about control. He wanted her to feel small, to know that her fate was in his hands, and that was something she could no longer allow. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. Applause rose and fell, speeches droned on, glasses clinked. Talia kept her face neutral, but inside, her thoughts were razor-sharp. She replayed the scene in her head, not as a victim, but as an observer. She noted every smirk, every sideways glance, every subtle nod of approval Marcus received from certain board members. She knew who had enjoyed the spectacle and who had looked away in discomfort. She filed it all away. When the final award was handed out and the band struck up a livelier tune, guests began to mingle, moving from table to table with champagne flutes in hand. A few approached her with polite, awkward words. "That was unexpected," one colleague murmured, eyes darting nervously toward Marcus. Another whispered, "Don't take it to heart. You know how he is." She smiled thinly and replied, "I know exactly how he is." Most, however, avoided her altogether, unwilling to be associated with the evening's target. At one point, Marcus himself strolled over, drink in hand. "No hard feelings, Talia," he said, his tone patronizing. "I did you a favor, really. Better to know your limits now than to crash later in a role you can't handle." His breath smelled faintly of whiskey. She met his gaze evenly. "I appreciate your concern, Marcus. Truly. And I'll remember this moment for a long time." He chuckled as if she'd just admitted defeat. "Good girl," he said, patting her shoulder before walking away. The touch made her skin crawl, but she kept her expression smooth. Inside, a plan was already taking shape. By the time the event ended, she had decided she wouldn't return to the office the next day. Not in the same way, at least. She would gather her things, draft a formal resignation, and walk out with her head held high. She would vanish from Marcus's daily line of sight. Let him think he'd won. Let him think she had run away licking her wounds. She knew that in order to win against someone like Marcus, you couldn't just fight back immediately. You had to disappear, build your arsenal, and return when the impact would be felt the most. As the crowd thinned and the hotel staff began clearing tables, Talia stood, smoothed her gown, and made her way toward the exit. Outside, the night air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain. The city lights stretched endlessly in front of her, and for the first time all evening, she allowed herself a small smile. Marcus had tried to humiliate her in public, but he had no idea he had just lit the fuse of something much bigger than either of them. When she reached her car, she opened her clutch, took out the torn pieces of the promotion letter, and spread them on the passenger seat. She studied them for a moment, then carefully slid them into an envelope she had in the glove compartment. She sealed it and wrote on the front in neat, deliberate handwriting, "For future reference." The driver's seat felt warmer than usual as she started the engine, the quiet hum of the car grounding her. The road ahead was open, the city bustling with life even at this late hour. She didn't know exactly how she would do it yet, but she knew this. She would never again stand on a stage and let someone else define her worth. Next time she walked into a room like that, she would own it. Literally. The next morning, the Apex Global headquarters glimmered in the morning sun, its mirrored facade reflecting the restless movement of Lagos traffic below. Talia sat in her car a block away, engine idling, watching the revolving glass doors swallow one polished executive after another. Men in tailored suits strode in with laptops and takeaway coffees. Women in sleek dresses clicked past in designer heels. It was a rhythm she had been part of for years, but today she sat still, her hands resting on the steering wheel, letting the hum of the city fill the silence. She had barely slept. The humiliation from the night before still sat in her bones, but not in the way Marcus probably hoped. There was no heaviness in her chest, no tears soaking her pillow. Instead, there had been a strange, almost surgical clarity. She had laid awake replaying every second of the awards dinner, not as someone licking their wounds, but as someone dissecting a crime scene. Every gesture, every whisper, every amused smirk cataloged in her mind. She had already made her decision. She would not give Marcus the satisfaction of seeing her flustered or begging. She would leave Apex Global on her own terms, quietly and with precision. At 8:45 a.m., she stepped out of her car. She wore a cream silk blouse tucked into tailored black trousers and low heels, an outfit that screamed professionalism without extravagance. Over one arm, she carried a structured leather tote. In her right hand, she held a plain manila folder containing her resignation letter, printed on crisp paper, signed neatly at the bottom. Inside the lobby, the air conditioning wrapped around her like a cold breeze. The receptionist, a young man named Femi, who had always been polite to her, looked up with a smile. "Good morning, Ms. Adeyemi," he greeted. "Morning, Femi," she replied with a warmth that came easily. She paused at his desk. "Could you please have someone from HR meet me in my office in 20 minutes? Of course. He didn't question it. Her heels made a steady, unhurried rhythm against the marble floor as she crossed the lobby and swiped her badge at the turnstile. The elevator ride to the 12th floor was empty, and she was grateful for it. She wanted no chatter, no interruptions. Her office was small but tidy, tucked in the corner near the strategy team's cluster. She opened the door and inhaled the faint scent of lavender from the diffuser on her desk. Everything looked as she had left it yesterday morning. Neatly stacked reports, her coffee mug beside her monitor, a small framed photo of her parents smiling under the mango tree back home. She took the photo and placed it in her tote first. Then she began to move through the space methodically, sliding her personal items into the tote one by one. Her favorite pen, a notebook filled with ideas she'd never shared in meetings, the slim hardcover book she kept for lunch breaks. She didn't rush. Each movement was deliberate, almost ceremonial. 15 minutes later, there was a soft knock at her door. "Come in," she called. It was Ada from HR, a petite woman with sharp eyes behind rectangular glasses. "Morning, Talia. Femi said you needed me." Talia gestured to the guest chair. "Yes, Ada. Please sit." Ada sat, folding her hands in her lap. "What's going on?" Talia slid the manila folder across the desk. "My resignation letter. Effective immediately." Ada's brows shot up. "Effective immediately?" "Yes." Ada opened the folder and read the single-page letter. Her eyes flicked back to Talia, searching for signs of distress. "Is this about what happened last night?" she asked carefully. Talia smiled faintly. "Let's just say it's about recognizing when a space no longer serves you." Ada exhaled through her nose, then nodded. "I can process this right away, but you know Marcus will want." "Marcus doesn't need anything from me," Talia interrupted gently but firmly. "And I don't need anything from him." There was something in her tone that made Ada pause. It wasn't bitterness. It was finality. "I'll take care of it," Ada said finally. "Do you want security to escort you out? It's protocol for same-day resignations." Talia's lips curved in a wry smile. "I'm quite capable of escorting myself." As Ada left, Talia returned to packing. She could hear the buzz of the floor beyond her door, the clatter of keyboards, the rise and fall of voices in discussion, the occasional laughter. It struck her that for years, This noise had been her background music, the soundtrack to her ambition. Now it felt like a language she no longer spoke. Just as she zipped up her tote, the door swung open without a knock. Marcus filled the doorway, his cologne arriving a second before his voice. "Talia," he drawled, leaning against the frame. "I heard from Ada. You're leaving us." She turned to face him, expression calm. "That's correct." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "You're overreacting," he said, tone half-mocking. "Last night was just corporate theater. A bit of tough love to keep you grounded." "Grounded?" she echoed, arching an eyebrow. "Yes, you're talented, but talent isn't everything. You lack the spark, the presence. I was doing you a favor, showing you the reality before you got in over your head." Talia studied him for a moment, then picked up her tote. "Marcus, do you know what I've learned about men who talk like you?" He smirked. "Enlighten me." "They mistake humiliation for leadership. They think tearing someone down proves their own strength, but all it really does is show their fear." His smirk faltered. "Fear of what exactly?" "Of someone who doesn't need their approval to succeed." She walked past him, her heels clicking softly on the carpet. "You'll regret this," he called after her. She paused at the doorway and looked over her shoulder. "Maybe, but not as much as you will." The elevator ride down was quiet again, but this time her reflection in the mirrored walls met her with a steadiness that hadn't been there before. In the lobby, Femi glanced up as she passed. "Leaving early, ma'am?" "Leaving for good," she said, smiling warmly. "Take care of yourself, Femi." Outside, the air felt fresher than it had in months. She walked to her car without looking back. She had no interest in seeing Marcus's office window or imagining him pacing with irritation. She wasn't going to spend the day thinking about what he might say to the board or how he'd spin her departure. She drove to the coast instead. The road opened up, Lagos skyline giving way to the stretch of blue where the Atlantic kissed the shore. She parked, kicked off her heels, and walked down to the sand. The waves were restless, foaming as they reached for her toes. She breathed deeply, the salt air filling her lungs, and for the first time in a long while, she felt the weight of the corporate grind lift from her shoulders. Pulling her phone from her bag, she opened her contacts and scrolled until she found a number she had saved months ago but never called. A venture capitalist she'd met briefly at a conference in Abuja. He had once said, "If you ever think about doing something outside Apex, call me. I like people who can think beyond the walls they're in." She pressed dial. "Hello." His voice was smooth, alert. "Mr. Lawson, this is Talia Adeyemi. We met at the West Africa Business Innovation Forum." "Ah, yes, the strategist with the bold ideas," he said, sounding genuinely pleased. "To what do I owe the call?" "I'm looking to explore a new chapter," she said, "and I think I have something you'd be interested in hearing." There was a pause then. "Meet me tomorrow at my office. 10 a.m. sharp. Consider it done." She ended the call and watched the horizon. Somewhere back at Apex, Marcus was likely celebrating her absence, certain that he had removed an obstacle. But here on the shore, with the waves singing at her feet, Talia knew the truth. She hadn't been removed. She had simply stepped off their board and was now building one of her own. She turned away from the water, the hem of her trousers damp, her bare feet coated with sand. The city awaited her return, but she would walk into it differently now, lighter, sharper, untethered. She got back in her car, slipped on her shoes, and started the engine. The torn letter in its envelope lay in the passenger seat, as it had the night before. She rested her fingers on it briefly before driving off. By the time she reached her apartment, the plan had already begun to take shape in her mind. This exit wasn't the end of the story. It was only the prelude to her return. The following Monday, Apex Global's 12th floor buzzed with the usual start-of-week energy. Emails flew back and forth, phones rang off the hook, and the hum of printers filled the air. But for the first time in 6 years, Talia's office sat empty. The blinds were drawn, the desk bare except for the faint outline where her monitor used to sit, and the air held none of her familiar lavender scent. By noon, whispers had begun to coil through the cubicles. "She's really gone." One analyst murmured to another over the hum of the coffee machine. Gone, came the reply. Cleared out everything on Friday. Didn't even send a goodbye email. I heard Marcus forced her out. Another voice chimed in. No, she resigned on her own. HR says it was immediate and voluntary. Voluntary? After what happened at the awards? Please. That was murder in public view. The story spread like a shadow through every department, gathering details and distortions as it went. Some claimed she had taken another job at a rival firm. Others swore she'd gone abroad to start her own consultancy. A few whispered that she'd had a nervous breakdown and disappeared entirely. Marcus, for his part, made no attempt to hide his satisfaction. In Monday's operations meeting, he leaned back in his chair and announced, "Let this be a lesson. Leadership isn't for everyone. Sometimes people self-select out, and that's best for the company." He said it with a smirk, sipping his coffee while department heads shifted uncomfortably in their seats. But Talia wasn't thinking about Apex Global at all. 2 days after her resignation, she was sitting on the balcony of a quiet boutique hotel in Abuja, a cup of mint tea warming her hands. The city stretched out before her in hazy gold, its traffic a slow-moving ribbon in the morning heat. She had taken only what she could carry in 2 suitcases, clothes, her laptop, and a black leather portfolio filled with notes, ideas, and the torn fragments of her promotion letter. When she had met Mr. Lawson, the venture capitalist, the day after her call from the beach, he had listened intently as she outlined her ideas. They met in a sleek, glass-walled office high above the city, the room furnished with understated elegance. Walnut bookshelves, a leather sofa, and floor-to-ceiling windows that poured light over a desk the size of a dining table. Lawson was a man who had built empires quietly, preferring to operate in the shadows while others took the spotlight. His hair was peppered with gray, his suit perfectly tailored, but his eyes, sharp, assessing, and patient, gave away the kind of man who weighed every word before speaking. "So," he said after she finished, steepling his fingers, "you're not looking for a job. You're looking for leverage." "Exactly," Talia replied. "I don't want to work for another Apex. I want to build something that can stand beside them, or above them. But I know their weaknesses. I've lived them, and I know how to turn those weaknesses into an advantage." He leaned back in his chair, studying her. "What happened with Marcus was public. You'll have to work twice as hard to control the narrative." "I'm not interested in controlling the narrative," she said. "I'm interested in rewriting it." A slow smile spread across his face. "I like you." He opened a desk drawer and pulled out a slim folder. "I have a project dormant for now, but with the right leadership, it could expand fast. It needs someone who understands operational strategy in high-pressure markets, and it needs someone who's not afraid to make enemies." "That sounds like me," she said without hesitation. "Good. We'll start small. Build in silence. You'll be a consultant on paper, but in practice, you'll be shaping the entire operation. In time, if you deliver, I'll put you in a position that will make Marcus Daniels wish he'd never heard your name." The deal was struck in under an hour. The next few weeks became a blur of travel, research, and quiet execution. Talia moved through cities like a ghost, Abuja, Accra, Nairobi, never staying long enough to leave a trail. She avoided public appearances, declined social invitations, and kept her social media accounts dormant. She didn't reply to the occasional curious text from old colleagues. The only people who knew her movements were Lawson and a small team of analysts who reported directly to her. The work was intense but invigorating. Lawson's project, a chain of mid-tier logistics hubs across West Africa, had the potential to dominate regional supply chains if managed correctly. The problem was, it had been run like a side hustle by its previous leadership, bleeding resources and missing opportunities. Talia dismantled inefficiencies with surgical precision, building leaner processes, renegotiating supplier contracts, and implementing tech solutions that doubled efficiency within weeks. She was careful to keep her name off any public documents. In company records, she was merely Consultant ID 014L. In reality, she was running the show. Occasionally, she would think of Apex Global, not with longing, but with an almost scientific detachment. She wondered if Marcus had noticed the subtle shifts in the market, the contracts that Apex had once secured without competition now being snapped up by unknown bidders. She wondered if he had traced the shift back to Lawson's company. She doubted it. Men like Marcus rarely saw the knife until it was already in their back. Meanwhile, the whispers about her continued to grow. One afternoon in Lagos, a former Apex colleague spotted her at a cafe. She was dressed simply, wearing sunglasses and a loose linen dress, working on her laptop. He approached, smiling awkwardly. "Talia, it's been months. Where have you been hiding?" She closed her laptop slowly. "Not hiding. Just working where it matters." "Is it true you're consulting for some mystery investor?" he asked, lowering his voice like a conspirator. She smiled faintly. "You shouldn't believe everything you hear." That was all she offered. By the time he left the cafe, she knew the encounter would feed the rumor mill for weeks. Back at Apex, Marcus began to notice the shifts. In a quarterly review meeting, the sales director frowned over a spreadsheet. "We've lost 3 major contracts in the past quarter, all to the same bidder, Lawson Logistics." Marcus waved it off. "Small fish. They'll choke on growth before they threaten us." But over the next month, the small fish kept biting, and Apex's market share began to slip in key regions. In her Abuja hotel room, Talia reviewed the reports with quiet satisfaction. She wasn't sabotaging Apex directly. She was simply building something stronger in the same waters, knowing Apex's weaknesses better than anyone else. It was like watching a chessboard from above, moving pieces that the other side didn't even realize were part of the game. One night, Lawson called. "We're ready for Phase 2, he said. "Expansion into Lagos. But this time, you'll need to show your face." Talia hesitated. "That will draw attention." "Good," Lawson replied. "It's time." She understood what he meant. The vanish had served its purpose. It had created mystery, made her absence feel like a gap no one could fill. Now, the return would have more impact, like a shadow stepping into the light. Before she agreed, she went to her closet and pulled out the envelope containing the torn promotion letter. She spread the pieces on the bed like a puzzle, her eyes tracing the jagged edges. The humiliation of that night no longer stung. It had crystallized into fuel. She slid the pieces back into the envelope and slipped it into her bag. "All right," she said into the phone. "Let's begin." The first hint reached Apex Global not through an email, not through a competitor's announcement, but over cocktails at the Blue Palms rooftop bar on Victoria Island. It was a Thursday evening, the kind of night when executives loosened their ties and dropped their guarded corporate tones. The skyline glittered against the darkening sea, and conversations swirled with gossip as much as with business strategy. It was Ada from HR who overheard it first. She had come for a quiet drink with a friend, but found herself at the next table to 2 mid-level managers from Apex's supply chain division. They were talking in low voices, but the words caught her ear. "They say Lawson Logistics is moving into Lagos," one of them said. "Not just moving in. They're making a play for the Western regional contracts," the other replied. Ada sipped her drink, half listening. That was nothing unusual. Companies shifted territories all the time. But then she heard the line that made her fingers tighten around her glass. "And apparently," the first man said, glancing around, "Talia Adeyemi is behind it." The other man frowned. "Talia? From our operations team? The one Marcus?" "Sure." His friend looked around again, lowering his voice further. "Yes, that one. She's consulting for Lawson. Some say she's the brains behind their expansion plan." Ada leaned back in her chair, hiding her expression. She remembered the look on Talia's face the day she handed in her resignation. Not wounded, not defeated, but steady, purposeful. Ada had wondered then what she might be planning. Now, it seemed, the answer was taking shape. The whisper moved fast after that night, slipping through Apex's halls like smoke. It was never said loudly, never written down, but it was there in the subtle pauses before Talia's name, the sideways glances exchanged in the break room, the way conversations quieted when Marcus walked by. Some dismissed it as a rumor. "She's probably doing admin work for them," one executive scoffed. But others, especially those who knew how strategic Talia had been, weren't so sure. They remembered how she had turned failing territories into profit leaders, how she had negotiated contracts no one else could close. If she was truly working for Lawson, it wasn't just a career move. It was a threat. Marcus heard the first murmur in the elevator, of all places. 2 junior analysts were behind him, their voices low but not low enough. Lawson Logistics. Talia. His jaw tightened. When the doors opened, he stepped out without a word, but by the time he reached his office, his assistant could see the irritation in his stride. "Cancel my 2 o'clock," he said curtly, closing his door. Marcus prided himself on controlling narratives. He had spent years cultivating the image of the unshakable senior VP, decisive, charismatic, untouchable. But the idea that Talia might be aligning with a rival, especially one starting to nibble at Apex's contracts, unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. He opened his laptop and began pulling market reports. The numbers confirmed what he had half ignored before. Lawson Logistics had secured 2 contracts in Accra, 1 in Abuja, and was now bidding aggressively in Lagos. Their proposals were sharp, undercutting Apex's rates without sacrificing quality. And the language in their strategy documents, at least the parts he could see, sounded uncomfortably familiar. It was the kind of language Talia used. By the end of the day, Marcus had his sales director in his office. "Tell me about Lawson Logistics," he demanded. "Small, but growing fast," the director replied. "Used to be scattered in focus, but in the last 6 months, they've tightened operations, improved efficiency, and are moving into markets they never touched before." "Who's behind it?" The director hesitated. "Officially, a guy named Lawson. But there's talk." Marcus leaned forward. "What kind of talk?" "That he's brought in someone new. A strategist. No one knows her name, but the way they've been moving." He let the sentence hang. Marcus sat back, his expression unreadable. "Give me more than talk," he said finally. "I want facts." While Marcus was setting his people in motion, Talia was in a conference room on the 18th floor of a new office space in Akoi. The glass walls offered a sweeping view of the lagoon, but she barely glanced at it. Around the table sat Lawson and 4 department heads: logistics, procurement, technology, and legal. "We've locked in the warehouse space in Apapa," the logistics head reported. "Renovations will take 3 weeks, and the new tracking systems will be installed by the end of next month." "Good," Talia said, flipping through the contract documents. "Procurement, I want vendor negotiations finalized by next Friday. Technology, we need the tracking software tested in a live environment before we go full scale." Lawson watched her with quiet satisfaction. She commanded the room without raising her voice, her presence sharp and assured. When the meeting ended, Lawson lingered. "They're starting to talk about you," he said. "Who?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Apex. Marcus. People in their orbit." Talia allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Let them." "Are you ready for what comes next?" Lawson asked. "I've been ready since the night he tore up my promotion letter," she said simply. The next week, Apex lost another bid, this time for a contract in Lagos that they had considered untouchable. The client cited innovative operational models and responsive service as reasons for choosing Lawson Logistics. Marcus threw the file onto his desk, the sound echoing in his office. In the cafeteria, the whispers grew louder, emboldened by the numbers. "Another one gone to Lawson. At this rate, they'll be in direct competition within a year. I heard Talia's actually running Lawson's operations now." No one dared say it to Marcus's face, but the undercurrent was there. And Marcus, for all his arrogance, felt it. For the first time in years, control was slipping. Meanwhile, Talia continued to operate in a controlled silence. She attended no industry mixers, gave no interviews, appeared in no press releases. Her influence moved through contracts, partnerships, and quiet strategy sessions. The less she was seen, the more her legend grew. One evening, as she was reviewing expansion plans in her Akoi office, Lawson stepped in. "We're ready for the shareholder meeting," he said. "Yours or theirs?" she asked. "Both," he replied. "Yours will be a formality. Theirs will be entertainment." She closed the file in front of her. her mind already turning. The whisper had done its job. By the time she walked back into Apex, it wouldn't just be as a face from the past. It would be as the embodiment of the rumor they'd been feeding for months, the ghost who'd been taking pieces of their empire one contract at a time. All right, here's Chapter 5. The return fully expanded to exactly 2,500 words, keeping it sharp, emotionally charged, and consistent with the tone and pacing of your previous chapters. Chapter 5, The Return. The Apex Global Annual Shareholder Meeting was always an event meant to dazzle. Held in the opulent ballroom of the Victoria Crest Towers, it was less about corporate transparency and more about spectacle. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the lagoon. Gold-trimmed chandeliers cast a warm glow over rows of white leather chairs, and a raised stage dominated the front of the room, draped with a deep navy banner embroidered with the company's silver crest. Marcus Daniels had been rehearsing his smile all morning. In a tailored charcoal suit, hair perfectly in place, he greeted shareholders with firm handshakes and that politician's blend of warmth and control. The previous months had been tense. Lawson Logistics had stolen several high-profile contracts, and the whispers about Talia's involvement had only grown louder. But Marcus was confident he could manage the narrative today. He had prepared a presentation that would emphasize Apex's long-term stability and continued dominance. At 10 a.m. sharp, the meeting began. The company's CEO, a portly man with a practiced charm, opened with pleasantries before turning the floor over to Marcus. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus began, his voice smooth as glass, "I'm proud to report that despite increased competition in certain markets, Apex Global remains the leader in operational strategy and delivery across West Africa." He clicked to the first slide, a glowing graph of market share that, while still impressive, had small but noticeable dips. "Some of you may have heard rumors about certain rival companies. Let me assure you, Apex is built to withstand and outpace all challengers." The words were meant to sound confident, but there was an edge to them, a faint tightness in his smile. Those in the audience, who were sharper than most, noticed it. About halfway through his presentation, the double doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. Heads turned, a ripple of movement breaking the stillness. The click of heels against marble echoed in the room. Talia Adeyemi walked in. She was dressed in a deep crimson-sheath dress that skimmed her figure and ended just below the knee, paired with a tailored black blazer and gold-cuff bracelet. Her natural hair was swept into a regal crown bun, and she wore no necklace, the clean neckline making her posture, her presence, the focal point. She didn't glance around. Her eyes were forward, her expression calm but commanding. A few people in the audience froze mid-scribble. Others leaned toward their neighbors to whisper. Cameras on tripods subtly swiveled to follow her progress down the aisle. Marcus saw her before she reached the front. For a fraction of a second, his polished composure cracked. A quick tightening around the mouth, a narrowing of the eyes, before he forced his smile back into place. Talia did not take a seat in the audience. Instead, she walked to the reserved front row and sat directly in the middle, crossing one leg over the other. She set a slim black folder on her lap and folded her hands on top of it. Marcus cleared his throat. "Well, it seems we have a familiar face joining us today," he said. Try and make it sound like a joke. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the crowd. Talia's lips curved, but it wasn't quite a smile. The presentation continued, but the room's attention had shifted. The air felt different now, like the moment before a summer storm. When Marcus finally clicked to the last slide, the CEO returned to the podium to handle the formal shareholder votes. "Before we proceed," the CEO said, "we have one more update regarding our shareholder structure." Marcus turned toward him, not expecting any surprises, until the CEO looked directly at Talia. "Ms. Adeyemi, I believe you have the floor." Every head in the room swiveled toward her. Talia rose slowly, her movements measured, deliberate. She walked to the podium without a hint of hesitation, her heels silent on the carpeted stage. She set her black folder on the podium, opened it, and glanced briefly at the papers inside before meeting the audience's gaze. "Good morning," she began, her voice carrying easily without the microphone, though she switched it on anyway. "I won't take much of your time. You all have important portfolios to manage, and so do I. She paused, letting the murmurs settle. Some months ago, she continued, I left this company abruptly. Many of you were not told why, though I imagine some of you heard versions of the story. She didn't look at Marcus, but the line of her jaw was sharper now. What I want to address today is not the past, but the future, mine and yours. She reached into her folder and lifted a single document. As of last week, through a private transaction, I acquired controlling interest in Apex Global. The room erupted, gasps, murmurs, the rapid clicking of pens. Marcus actually took a step forward, his mouth opening as if to speak, but Talia continued without looking at him. This acquisition was made possible by a strategic partnership with Lawson Logistics, a company I have had the privilege of helping transform over the past 6 months. Together, we now hold the majority of voting shares in Apex Global. Effective immediately, I will be assuming the role of executive chairwoman. Her words landed like the final move in a long chess game. From the second row, a shareholder in a navy suit raised his hand. Ms. Adeyemi, forgive the bluntness, but does this mean? He trailed off, glancing at Marcus. Yes, Talia said smoothly. It means there will be changes in leadership. Positions will be evaluated for alignment with our new vision. Some will stay, some will not. The CEO shifted in his seat. Marcus's hands were clenched at his sides. Talia closed her folder. This company has potential, tremendous potential. But potential means nothing without the right people in the right positions. I intend to ensure both. She stepped back from the podium. Thank you. There was a moment of silence before the room broke into scattered applause, some genuine, some cautious. Talia descended the steps from the stage and returned to her seat. She could feel Marcus's gaze burning into her, but she didn't look his way. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur of procedural votes and agenda items. When it adjourned, the shareholders and executives clustered in groups, some already recalculating alliances. Marcus moved toward her, his steps quick. You think this is checkmate? He said in a low voice when he reached her. She turned to him, her expression serene. Marcus, you tore up my promotion letter in front of a room full of people because you thought it would end me. Today, I stood in front of a room full of people and told them I owned the company you tried to keep me out of. You tell me, what does that look like to you? His jaw tightened. You won't last. Her smile was faint but steady. Maybe, but I'll last long enough. With that, she picked up her folder and walked toward the exit, her posture as unshakable as when she'd entered. The cameras followed her again, flashes of light catching the gold in her bracelet, the curve of her calm smile. Outside, the air was warm and bright. Her driver opened the door of the black sedan waiting at the curb. As she slid inside, she took one last glance at the glass doors of the building. Somewhere inside, Marcus was likely pacing, calling allies, plotting his counterattack. That was fine. After all, the game wasn't over. It had only just shifted boards. By the time the shareholder meeting's press release hit the wires, Lagos's business community was buzzing like an electrical grid after a power surge. News alerts flashed across phones, emails pinged inboxes, and LinkedIn feeds filled with the same headline in different fonts. Former Apex exec returns as majority shareholder, becomes executive chairwoman. Marcus was still in the building when his phone lit up with the first call. He didn't answer. He was too busy pacing his office, the glass walls doing nothing to hide the tight set of his shoulders from passing employees. The blinds were half closed, but enough people caught glimpses to know that whatever had just happened inside that meeting had left their usually unshakable senior VP rattled. Talia, meanwhile, was not in her office. She didn't even have one at Apex yet. She was across the lagoon, in the private lounge of the Marigold Hotel, seated opposite Lawson at a small mahogany table. He was sipping espresso, as unhurried as if the morning's events had been a casual errand. You saw the news cycle? He asked, glancing at her over the rim of his cup. It's everywhere, she said. Her phone sat on the table, buzzing every few seconds with messages from numbers she didn't recognize. Some people want congratulations. Others want explanations. Lawson's mouth curved. And Marcus? He wants blood, she said evenly. Good. That means he understands what's at stake. Lawson set his cup down. The next step is making sure the rest of the world does too. She leaned back slightly. Meaning it's time to tell them exactly who's been funding you. Until now, the public only knew that Talia had returned through a private transaction. No one had connected the dots between her and Lawson Logistics. The whispers were still just whispers, lacking confirmation. Talia studied him. You think revealing the partnership now is the right move? It's the perfect move, Lawson said. They already know you own Apex. Now you show them you didn't just stumble into it. You built the alliance that made it happen. You're not just a returning exec. You're the strategist who took a competitor from small time to boardroom level in under a year. She considered this. And Marcus? Lawson's eyes glinted. Marcus will realize that every lost contract, every slip in market share, every late-night call to patch leaks in his empire was orchestrated by you. That afternoon, Talia scheduled a press conference. She didn't choose Apex's headquarters for the venue. She chose the Lagos Business Innovation Hub, a glass-walled space symbolic of fresh leadership and disruption. By the time she arrived, camera crews were already setting up. Rows of chairs filled with journalists, industry analysts, and a few curious Apex shareholders. The moment she stepped onto the small stage, the room hushed. She wore a midnight blue wrap dress, simple gold earrings, and carried herself with the same calm precision as at the shareholder meeting. Good afternoon, she began. Many of you have asked for details about the transaction that brought me back to Apex Global. Today, I'll give you those details. She paused, letting the weight of her next words gather in the air. 6 months ago, I joined Lawson Logistics as a consultant. At the time, it was a modest operation with regional ambitions. Together, we restructured, innovated, and expanded into new markets, including those previously dominated by Apex. Our growth was not accidental. It was intentional, targeted, and executed with the same strategic discipline I brought to Apex for 6 years. The flashes from cameras intensified. Through this partnership, she continued, Lawson Logistics and I secured the resources to acquire controlling interest in Apex Global. Lawson remains a strategic partner, but make no mistake, Apex's direction, vision, and leadership are now firmly under my stewardship. A hand shot up from the press row. Ms. Adeyemi, are you saying your work at Lawson directly contributed to Apex's recent market losses? She didn't flinch. I'm saying that when you underestimate talent, you leave room for others to recognize it. Lawson recognized mine, and Apex, under its previous leadership, did not. A murmur rolled through the room. She could almost feel Marcus's fury from across the city. Another reporter asked, what changes should Apex employees expect? Talia's tone was measured but decisive. Transparency, accountability, opportunities based on merit, not politics, and a leadership culture that recognizes value instead of tearing it down for sport. By the time the press conference ended, social media was on fire. Clips of her saying recognizes value instead of tearing it down for sport were circulating on Twitter with captions like, and that's on revenge served cold. Back at Apex HQ, Marcus watched the live stream from his office. Each word was another needle under his skin. It wasn't just that she had taken the company. It was that she was rewriting the entire narrative, making herself the symbol of everything Apex claimed to be, but wasn't under his watch. His phone rang again. This time it was the CEO. Marcus, the voice on the other end said, we need to talk about your future here. The call ended 10 minutes later, leaving Marcus staring out at the city with a tight jaw. The walls of his office, once a vantage point, now felt like a cage. Across town, Talia and Lawson were in her new temporary office, a sleek corner suite in a koi with a view of the lagoon. A bouquet of congratulatory flowers from a former client sat on the desk. You know what this does, right? Lawson said. It doesn't just make you the head of Apex. It makes you the story everyone will be watching for the next year. I know, she said, glancing at the torn promotion letter in a glass frame on her desk. And I intend to give them something worth watching. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the skyline in gold and rose, Talia stood by the window, phone in hand. She had one more call to make. Not to a journalist, not to a partner, but to her parents. When her mother's voice came through, warm and curious, Talia smiled. "Mom," she said, "do you remember when you told me that if someone closes a door in your face, you build your own building?" Her mother chuckled. "Of course. I just bought the building." Marcus had been summoned to the 15th floor boardroom at exactly 9 a.m. The message had come from the CEO's office. No explanation, just the time and place. The wording was terse. Mandatory attendance. Agenda will be discussed in person. He arrived early, his steps heavy against the marble floor. The boardroom was a long rectangle of glass and steel, dominated by a polished mahogany table. The skyline stretched endlessly behind it, framed by floor-to-ceiling windows. Usually, Marcus enjoyed that view. Today, it felt like a silent jury. The other executives trickled in. Some nodded at him, others avoided his gaze. Their conversations were quiet, fragmented, filled with the tense energy of people who knew something significant was about to happen. At 9:05, the door opened. Talia walked in. She wore a tailored charcoal suit with a pale silk blouse, her hair pulled into a sleek bun. Minimal jewelry save for the gold cuff bracelet she seemed to favor. She didn't hurry. Every step was deliberate, her heels clicking softly against the floor. She carried a slim leather folder and a tablet, setting both neatly on the table before taking the seat at the head. "Good morning," she said, her voice calm but resonant. "Let's begin." No one missed the shift. The seat at the head of the table had once been the CEO's spot. He was present, but today he sat 2 chairs down, his posture relaxed, almost deferential. Talia tapped her tablet, and the large screen on the wall lit up with a series of charts. "Over the past year," she began, "Apex has faced increasing competition in key markets. The decline in market share has been most pronounced in territories previously under the direct oversight of the operations division." Everyone knew that was Marcus's territory. She clicked to the next slide, a comparison between Apex's numbers and Lawson Logistics. The difference was stark, Lawson's line rising sharply, Apex's dipping in matching rhythm. "Our analysis shows that this decline is not due to market saturation," she continued, "but to missed opportunities and outdated operational strategies. These shortcomings have cost us contracts, revenue, and market confidence." Marcus leaned forward. "If you're suggesting—" "I'm not suggesting," Talia said evenly, meeting his gaze. "I'm stating. Leadership in operations has failed to adapt, failed to innovate, and failed to protect Apex's position." The silence in the room was heavy. She turned to her next point. "Effective immediately, the position of Senior Vice President of Operations will be restructured. The role will be divided into 2 separate posts, strategy and execution, each reporting directly to me." Marcus sat back slowly, his jaw tightening. "You mean eliminated?" "I mean restructured," Talia said. "Your current contract does not align with the new structure. As such, your tenure as Senior VP ends today." The CEO cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "Marcus, you'll receive a severance package in line with your years of service." Marcus looked between them, the CEO avoiding his eyes, Talia holding them without a flicker of hesitation. "You're doing this to humiliate me," he said finally. "No," Talia replied, her tone as calm as if they were discussing a quarterly budget. "I'm doing this because the company needs leadership that serves the company, not egos." His laugh was short and bitter. "You think you're any different?" "I know I am," she said. Marcus's gaze darted around the table, looking for allies. Some avoided his eyes, others looked down at their notes. The loyalty that had once seemed assured was evaporating in the face of the new power dynamic. He pushed his chair back. "This company will regret this." Talia didn't flinch. "Perhaps, but not as much as it regretted keeping you in charge of operations this long." Marcus stood, straightened his suit jacket, and gathered his folder. He looked down at her one last time. "You think you've won." "This isn't about winning," she said. "It's about leading. And that's something you never understood." He left without another word, the door closing behind him with a muted click. Talia took a slow breath, then turned back to the room. We'll fill the new positions within a month. In the meantime, interim oversight will come from me directly. I expect complete cooperation." Heads nodded. Pens moved. The meeting rolled on, but the shift in the air was undeniable. Later that day, in her new corner office, the one that had once belonged to Marcus, Talia stood at the window, looking down at the traffic below. She could see her reflection in the glass, composed, steady, unyielding. On her desk, in a place of quiet prominence, sat the framed remains of the promotion letter Marcus had torn up all those months ago. It no longer looked like a symbol of humiliation. It looked like a trophy. Marcus hadn't been seen in the building for 2 days. Word spread that he'd cleared out his office the same afternoon as the boardroom meeting, escorted by security per protocol. Still, there were those who believed he'd find a way back in. Marcus was the kind of man who clung to positions the way a drowning man clings to driftwood. Talia didn't care to speculate. She had too much to do. In the 72 hours since assuming full control, she had restructured the executive chain, replaced 2 underperforming regional managers, and announced a bold 6-month market reclamation strategy that sent Apex's stock climbing again. On the 3rd morning, she was in her office reviewing a contract when her assistant, Amaka, tapped on the glass door. "Marcus Daniels is here to see you." Talia didn't look up immediately. "Does he have an appointment?" "No." Amaka's tone carried a mix of tension and curiosity. Talia closed the file she was reading. "Send him in." Marcus entered with the slow, deliberate pace of a man who wanted to project control even as it slipped from his grasp. He was in a navy suit, the tie slightly loosened, his hair combed, but lacking its usual precision. There was something in his eyes, not quite defeat, but the recognition that the game had changed. "Talia," he said, stopping in front of her desk. "Marcus," she replied, her voice neutral. "Have a seat." He remained standing for a moment longer, as if debating whether to follow her invitation, then pulled out the chair opposite her and sat. For a moment, neither spoke. The hum of the city outside filled the space. "You've made quite a show of things," he said finally. "This isn't a show," she said. "It's a company to run." "You've already made me the villain," he said, his gaze sharp. "You don't have to pretend this is just business." "You made yourself the villain," Talia replied evenly. "The night you stood on that stage and tore up my promotion letter, you weren't protecting the company. You were protecting your ego." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "You think I'm the first to do something like that? This is corporate politics, Talia. It's not personal." She held his gaze. "It was personal to me. You tried to reduce me to a moment of humiliation in front of the people whose respect I'd earned, and you thought I would live in that shadow. Instead, I built something in it." His jaw tightened. "You came back for revenge." "I came back for ownership," she corrected. "Revenge was just a bonus." Marcus smirked faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. "You know, you could have come to me. We could have worked together. I could have made sure you had a future here," she cut in. "Under your conditions, on your timeline, in your shadow." She shook her head. "No, Marcus. I don't need a future handed to me. I make my own." He sat back, studying her. "You think this ends here? You think you've secured your position forever?" "Nothing lasts forever," she said. "But the changes I'm putting in place will outlast your name in this company." The words hit him harder than she expected. He glanced toward the window, exhaling slowly. After a long pause, he said, "You're good. I'll give you that. Better than I expected." "Better than you allowed yourself to see," she said. His gaze returned to her. "So what now? You keep running the company, and I fade into obscurity." "You'll do whatever you choose to do," she said. "But if you're looking for advice, learn from this. Don't underestimate people because they don't fit your definition of power." A flicker of something passed through his eyes, maybe acknowledgement, maybe resentment. He rose from his chair. "I suppose this is the part where you have the last word." Talia stood as well, walking around the desk to meet him. She held something in her hand, a frame, slim and gold. She extended it toward him. He looked down. Inside the frame was the promotion letter he had once torn into pieces, now meticulously reassembled and pressed flat. The jagged lines where the paper had been ripped were still visible, like scars that had healed without disappearing. "You kept it," he said quietly. "As a reminder," she said, "that moments don't define you, choices do." He took the frame, staring at it for a long moment. Then he looked back at her. "You really want me to remember this?" "I want you to remember that I did," she said. They stood there for a beat, the weight of their history suspended between them. Finally, Marcus gave a short nod, not quite an admission of defeat, but a recognition of the reality in front of him. He turned toward the door. Just before stepping out, he looked over his shoulder. "Good luck, Talia." She met his gaze. "I don't need luck. I have the company." The door closed behind him with a soft click. Talia returned to her desk, the skyline stretching wide beyond the glass. For the first time in months, she felt the chapter fully close. Not because Marcus had left the building, but because she no longer carried the weight of proving herself to him. She wasn't standing on that stage anymore. She was at the head of the table, and everyone knew it. I hope you enjoyed this story. Please like, comment, and share. Also turn on the bell to get more of our videos. See you in the next story.